I'm here in one of the weirdest pieces of land I've ever been, flying my drone over the Indian Ocean. There's a battle going on out here. It's not a battle for land or for people. This is a battle about fish.
One fisherman was killed and 5 others injured after Sri Lankan Navy opened fire near an island off the Tamil Nadu coast.
On one side, you have Sri Lankan fishermen in these coastal villages, where fishing is the economic lifeblood. And on the other side, you have their counterparts, Indian fishermen in these villages along the southeastern coast of India. On a clear day, you can see across this strait. It's only 20 kilometers or so. And out here on the water, there's an invisible line that marks where India's territorial waters end and where Sri Lanka's begin. Underneath this border, there's treasure. Not gold, but seafood. The communities on either side of this strait used to be friends, but now they're locked in conflict. One side has bigger, faster boats. The other side has a well-armed navy, equipped with warboats that they're using to patrol this border.
89 fishermen have been arrested by the Sri Lankan Navy and several boats have been seized.
The Sri Lankan Navy has the right to shoot at any part of the country to anyone who enters the territorial water. Is nothing new.
This is the fish war between India and Sri Lanka.
Fishing is more than a family affair. Whole communities participate. After the catch has been brought in, the villagers and children move in to get the fish out of the net.
This is Ram's Bridge. You look across, you can see Sri Lanka. One legend goes that the Hindu god Ram hired an army of monkey men to build a bridge from India to Sri Lanka so that he could go in and rescue his wife from a demon king. Geology suggests that there indeed may have been a walkable land bridge here, until a few thousand years ago when it was eroded back into the sea, erasing any land border between modern-day India and Sri Lanka. The only border that exists now between India and Sri Lanka is in the water. It was decided on in the 70s, and it looks like this. This border made it officially illegal for fishermen from either side to cross over into each other's waters to fish. And it was the start of what would eventually turn into a violent conflict.
The injured fishermen have been admitted to a hospital in Rameswaram.
In the 1960s, India was facing a financial crisis. And in response, the government was looking for new ways to stimulate the economy. So they turned to seafood exports, like prawns. The Indian government gave subsidies to fishermen to buy new boats so that they could harvest a huge number of prawns, which would feed demand all over the world. So, Indian fishermen in this town of Rameswaram cashed in on the opportunity, dramatically ramping up their fishing activities with these new boats called trawlers, which are able to drop nets with heavy weights on them to rake the bottom of the seabed in search for prawns and other seafood. It's an incredibly effective method for harvesting fish and shrimp, but these heavy metal weights rip up the seabed, damaging the seafloor's ecosystem, and this method, if uncontrolled, depletes fish supplies very quickly. The Indian fishermen quickly adopted these new boats, and soon there were thousands of these trawlers. Armed with their new boats and tied to international demand, the Indian fishermen aggressively fished these waters, tearing up the seafloor and depleting much of their fisheries. By the late 1970s, the Indian fishermen needed new waters to fish. This water border had recently been agreed upon by the two countries, but even still, the Indian fishermen began moving across it, illegally fishing in Sri Lankan waters. The massive amount of fishing contributed to an explosion in seafood exports from India. While India was cashing in on seafood products from Sri Lankan waters, Sri Lanka was descending into war. By the early 1980s, armed rebels were taking over large swaths of land in the north of the country, trying to create a new country for the oppressed Tamil people, the ethnic minority group that the residents of these fishing villages identify with.
And every day they take an oath pledging to sacrifice their mind, body and soul for Tamil Eelam, a separate state for a separate people.
It descended into a violent, long-lasting civil war that would result in over 150,000 deaths. And these fishing villages in Sri Lanka were caught right in the middle of it.
போர் நடந்து கொண்டிருந்த டைமில் நாங்கள் இந்த இயந்திர படகுகள் எதுவும் பாவிக்க இல்லை. வள்ளங்களில் தாங்கி தான் நாங்கள் தொழில் செய்கிறாங்க.
As a security precaution during the war, the Sri Lankan Navy started setting up security zones in much of the water, banning most fishing activities and prohibiting boats with motors.
Idyllic beaches once crammed with foreign tourists are now patrolled by the watchful military.
All of this was done in an attempt to weaken the Tamil rebels. But the result was a severe gutting of the economies here, which are totally reliant on fish. The catch in these districts declined immensely during the war. And not only did this affect the economies, but this fishing ban left Sri Lankan waters open for Indian trawlers to fish freely.
காரணமாக இந்திய மீனவர்கள் தங்களது தொழில் வளங்களை தங்களது தொழில் ஆதிக்கத்தை விரிவுபடுத்திக் கொண்டாங்க.
The violent civil war and the fishing ban in Sri Lanka dragged on through the 90s and into the early 2000s, allowing the Indian fishermen to illegally fish these waters with little repercussion. But then, everything changed.
Tamil tiger fighters retreat from their last stand. For now, the fighting seems to be over.
The war ended, and the security zones in the water were lifted. Sri Lankans could fish freely again, breathing new life into an economy that runs on fish. But as these fishermen went out on their boats, what they found were fleets of Indian trawlers in their waters, tearing up the seafloor, illegally digging for seafood treasure. And these Sri Lankan fishermen, coming out of a fishing ban and a 25-year civil war, had much smaller, weaker boats. They could never compete.
எங்கட ஒரு படகு அவன் 10 படகு இந்திய மீனவர்களின் படகு ஒரு படகு அப்படி இருக்கீங்க இப்போ ஆயிரக்கணக்கான படகுகள் நமது கடற்பரப்பில் வந்து தொழில் செய்ய நமது வாழ்வாதாரம் பாதிக்கப்படும்.
This is where things really start to heat up. The Sri Lankan Navy, which had previously been fighting a war, now turned its efforts towards cracking down on Indian fishermen that were poaching in Sri Lankan waters. The fish wars had begun.
The Naval Command arrested 4 Indian fishing poachers in Sri Lankan territorial waters.
There are mass protests against the death of the killing of this fisherman.
The Sri Lankan Navy came down hard, routinely arresting Indian fishermen and detaining them, sometimes for years. Many of the fishermen that I talked to while I was in India routinely go poaching across the border, and many of them said that they have been caught by the Navy. When the Navy detains the fishermen, they also take their boats. They eventually release the fishermen, but the boats remain impounded in Navy bases around the country.
இன்னைக்கு வந்துட்டு ஒரு சில ஓனர் போட்டு வச்சிருக்கவங்க எல்லாம் பார்த்தா தாலி நூல் இல்லாமல் இருக்காங்க. ஏன்னு கேட்டால் போட்டு போயிடுது.
Across the strait, this poaching by Indian fishermen has had deep ramifications in these villages.
எங்கட வாழ்வாதாரம் கடல்லாம் இருக்கு. அந்த கடலையே அள்ளிக்கொண்டு போனா நாங்கள் என்னத்தை சாப்பிட்றோம்?
Experts estimate that the direct monetary loss to Sri Lankan fishermen due to Indian poaching is anywhere from $16 to $56 million per year.
வாழ்ந்துறாங்க. இன்றைக்கு கடலில் தொழிலாளர்கள் வீதாசாரம் கூடிடுச்சு, தொழிலாளர் எண்ணிக்கை கூடிடுச்சு. ஒரு சூழலாம் இனிமேலும் காலத்தில் ஏற்படும். இனி கடலை நம்பி மக்கள் வாழ்கிறது அவ்வளவு சாத்தியப்பாடான ஒரு செயல்பாடு இல்லை.
எந்த நாளும் நாங்கள் பொறுத்து கொண்டு இருக்க மாட்டோம். எங்களோட வாழ்வாதாரம் பாதிக்கப்படும் என்ற புள்ள பட்டி கிடக்குமா இருந்தால் என்ற உசுறு எனக்கு பெருசு இல்லை. நாங்கள் இவங்களை பிடிச்சி கட்டி வைப்போம்.
This conflict over seafood has turned 2 Tamil communities, once allies, into enemies.
வாங்க அப்படின்னு சொல்லி கட்டி பிடிக்கிறோம். அவங்க நம்மளை கட்டி பிடிக்கிறதெல்லாம் இல்லை, அவங்க விட்டுடுறாங்க. தமிழருக்கு அனுபவிச்சு தான் இருக்கிறோம், ஒன்று சேர்த்துருக்கோம்.
இந்தியன் படகு வந்து இந்த 2 போட்டால் இழுக்கிற மடியால் தான் அந்த மீன் எங்களுக்கு சரியான குறைவாக இருக்குது. இந்த காலங்கள்லாம் சரியான மீன் படக்கூடிய சீசன் காலம்.
இவங்க எங்களுக்கு நிறைய தொல்லை கொடுக்குறாங்க, எங்களை வலைகளை வெட்டுறாங்க, நிறைய கஷ்டப்படுத்துகிறாங்க. இது அரசாங்கத்தில் கவனம், இந்திய அரசாங்கத்தில் கவனத்துக்கும்.
The Indian government has done little to resolve this conflict. They occasionally step in to free a group of detained fishermen, but none of their actions have led to a concrete solution to the conflict.
நிரந்தரமான தீர்வு இந்திய மீனவர்கள் இலங்கை கடற்பரப்பில் வருவது முற்றாக தடுக்கப்படணும். தடுக்கப்பட்டால்தான் யாழ் மாவட்ட மீனவர்களின் வாழ்வாதாரம் முற்றுமுழுதாக பாதுகாக்கப்படும்.
The Indian government, both national and local, seems to be turning a blind eye to these fishermen's practice of crossing the border. That's because these communities are already neglected and underserved by their faraway government. Stopping a practice that has bolstered their economy for years would create more disdain and frustration among the people.
என்ன அப்படி இருக்கு அரசு நமக்குன்னு எந்த உதவியும் செய்யல, கவர்மெண்டே கிடையாது சுத்தமா.
So, not much is likely to change anytime soon. And as the Navy and the fishermen continue to spar in these waters, the real losers in this situation continue to be these communities over here.
இந்திய தமிழர்களோடு ஐக்கியமாக பரிமாற்றங்கள் செய்ய ஆசையாக இருக்கிறோம், விருப்பமாக இருக்கிறோம். எங்களுக்கு இந்த கடலை விட்டால் வேறு வழி இல்லை. ஆகவே நாங்கள் இதிலிருந்து எந்த அளவிலும் கொஞ்சம் இம்மி அளவும் நாங்கள் இதுகளிலிருந்து விட்டு கொடுத்து வாழ முடியாதவர்களாக இருக்கிறோம். உங்களுடைய கடல் எல்லைகளுக்குள்ளே வரவில்லை. உங்களைப் போல வலுவான மீன்பிடி முறைகள் எங்களிடம் இல்லை.
The people here were barred from fishing during the decades-long Civil War, and now they have no chance of competing with their Indian neighbors, who have spent decades destroying their seabeds and stealing their fish. This was one of the most interesting places I had ever been, going to Sri Lanka and the southern coast of India. Got to see these really interesting places, but also seeing how important fish are to these economies. But India and Sri Lanka aren't the only places that are affected by the increasing demand for fish. There are a lot of different places around the world who are dealing with similar issues. And if you want to learn more about this issue and how it plays out in other countries, you should check out a documentary series called Superfish from Curiosity Stream. Curiosity Stream is a subscription streaming service that allows you to browse a huge repository of documentaries and nonfiction films from some of the world's best filmmakers. You can get unlimited access to Curiosity Stream starting at $2.99 a month. But because you're a Borders fan, you can go to curiositystream.com/borders and enter the promo code BORDERS and you'll get the first 31 days for free. CuriosityStream does not influence our editorial process or the videos we make, but they do support us and they do make videos like this possible. So, thank you CuriosityStream and stay tuned for more Borders.